The massive white Dogo Argentino collapsed against the wooden door, his powerful body trembling as heart-wrenching cries echoed through the silent hallway. His paws scratched desperately at the threshold, leaving marks that told a story no one could understand. Sarah pressed her hand against the door from the other side, tears streaming down her face as she finally understood what her loyal companion had been trying to tell her for 6 agonizing months. Inside that empty room, there was nothing. No furniture, no toys, no danger, just 4 bare walls and a freshly painted corner that held a secret so devastating it had broken the heart of the strongest dog she'd ever known. This is Thor, a 100-pound guardian who never showed fear, never backed down from protecting his family, and rarely made a sound unless absolutely necessary. But for months, he had been crying at this door every single day. And what they discovered hiding in that empty room would reveal a grief so profound, it would change everything they thought they knew about loyalty, loss, and the unbreakable bonds that connect us to those we love. But to understand how a fearless protector became a broken-hearted mourner standing guard at an empty door, we need to go back to the beginning. Back to when this family was whole, before the silence fell, before the door closed, and before Thor's world shattered in ways no one recognized until it was almost too late. Before we dive into Thor's heartbreaking story, do me a favor. Drop your country in the comments below and hit that subscribe button for Wind Echo Untold. We uncover the stories that break your heart and rebuild your faith in the bonds we share. You won't want to miss what happens next. Thor wasn't just a pet. He was a testament to everything the Dogo Argentino breed represents: unwavering courage, fierce loyalty, and a guardian instinct that runs deeper than training or commands. Sarah had brought him home 4 years ago, a white mountain of muscle and heart, and from day one, he became more than a dog. He became the family's silent sentinel. In their suburban home, where the afternoon sun filtered through maple trees and painted golden squares across hardwood floors, Thor moved like a shadow. He didn't demand attention. He didn't beg for treats or jump on visitors. He simply existed in a state of constant awareness, his dark eyes tracking every movement, his muscular frame positioning itself between his family and any perceived threat. When Mia was born, something shifted in Thor. The powerful dog who could take down a wild boar without hesitation became impossibly gentle around the tiny human. He would lie beside her crib for hours, his breathing synchronized with hers, his head resting on massive paws as he kept watch. As Mia grew from infant to toddler, Thor became her protector, her pillow, her silent companion who never left her side. Sarah often marveled at how a dog bred for hunting had transformed into the world's most patient babysitter. When Mia learned to walk, she used Thor's broad back for support. When she cried, Thor would press his forehead against hers until she calmed. The bond between the 5-year-old girl and her massive white guardian was something that transcended words. But Thor's capacity for love extended beyond Mia when they brought Apollo home, a tiny Dogo Argentino puppy with the same snow-white coat and endless potential. Thor transformed again. The stoic protector became a father. He taught Apollo how to play without being too rough, showed him where to sleep when the house got too loud, and cleaned the puppy's face with the same gentle precision he used with Mia. For 6 perfect months, the household thrived. Liam worked from home. Sarah managed the chaos with grace. Mia had her 2 best friends, and Thor had a purpose that filled every corner of his existence. Life was routine, predictable, and safe. The guest room at the end of the hallway sat mostly empty, occasionally used for storage or as a quiet space when someone needed solitude. It was unremarkable, forgettable, just another room in a house full of life and laughter. No one could have predicted it would become the center of a mystery that would consume them all. It started 3 weeks after they had to say goodbye to Apollo. The puppy had fallen ill suddenly, an aggressive infection that the veterinarians couldn't control despite every intervention. Sarah and Liam had made the impossible decision to end Apollo's suffering before it became unbearable. They had held him as he slipped away, Thor waiting anxiously in the clinic's hallway. sensing but not understanding the finality of what was happening behind that closed door. When they came home without Apollo, Thor searched. He checked every corner, every hiding spot, every place the puppy had ever been. His search was methodical, obsessive, growing more frantic as hours turned to days. The family, drowning in their own grief, assumed he would adjust. Dogs always adjust, they told themselves. To help everyone move forward, Sarah and Liam made a decision. The guest room, which had temporarily housed Apollo's recovery area during his final days, needed to be cleared out. They removed the blankets, the water bowls, the toys. They patched nail holes, repainted the walls a fresh cream color, and closed the door on that chapter of their lives. The transformation took a weekend. By Monday, the room looked like Apollo had never been there at all. They thought they were helping the healing process. They had no idea they were creating a prison of unresolved grief. On a Tuesday morning, exactly 3 weeks after Apollo's death, Sarah heard a sound that made her blood run cold. It wasn't a bark or a growl, sounds she was accustomed to from Thor. It was a whimper, low and persistent, filled with a pain that seemed almost human. She followed the sound down the hallway and found Thor sitting in front of the closed guest room door. His massive head was pressed against the wood and he was crying. Not the whine of a dog wanting attention or food. This was something else entirely, a sound of mourning, of confusion, of a heart trying to comprehend something incomprehensible. "Thor, what's wrong, buddy?" Sarah approached him slowly, but he didn't acknowledge her. His focus was completely fixed on the door. When she tried to lead him away, he planted his weight and refused to move. Eventually, thinking he just needed to see the empty room, she opened the door. Thor rushed inside. He moved directly to the far corner, the spot where Apollo's makeshift bed had been during those final days. He sniffed the floor intensely, circled the area 3 times, and then looked up at Sarah with eyes that broke her heart. Then he began to cry again, his body shaking with the force of his emotion. There was nothing there, nothing visible, just empty space and fresh paint. Sarah gently pulled him out and closed the door, hoping it was a one-time occurrence. But the next morning, Thor was back at the door. And the morning after that, and every single day that followed. The first month of Thor's obsession was manageable if concerning. Sarah tried everything she could think of to break the pattern. She took him to their veterinarian, Dr. Morrison, who conducted a thorough examination. Blood work was perfect, hearing was fine. No signs of cognitive decline or neurological issues. Physically, Thor was in peak condition. Sometimes dogs fixate on things after a loss, Dr. Morrison suggested. Give it time. He's grieving, but time didn't help. If anything, Thor's behavior intensified. He began spending entire days stationed outside that door. Sarah would find him there when she woke up, still there when Mia came home from school, and there again when she went to bed. He wasn't aggressive or destructive. He simply kept vigil, like a soldier guarding a post that only he understood. His scratching at the door became ritualistic. 3 soft scratches with his right paw, a pause, then a low whimper. Over and over, the same pattern, as if he was trying to communicate in a language no one else could speak. Sarah tried redirecting him with his favorite activities. Long walks in the park where he used to run free with Apollo. He would return home and go straight to the door. New toys that usually excited him, he ignored them completely. Even Mia, his beloved companion, couldn't break his focus. She would sit beside him in the hallway, her small hand resting on his broad back, and they would both stare at the door in shared confusion. The family's patience began to wear thin. Liam suggested they keep the door permanently open, eliminating the barrier that seemed to torment Thor. They tried it for 3 days. Thor moved into the room entirely, claiming the corner as his new sleeping spot. He would lie there for hours, occasionally whimpering, his eyes fixed on the junction where the wall met the floor. "This is crazy," Liam said one night as they watched Thor through the doorway. "It's been almost 2 months. He's wasting away in there," it was true. Thor had lost weight. His ribs were starting to show beneath his white coat. He ate only when Sarah hand-fed him, and even then without enthusiasm. The powerful, confident dog who had once commanded every room he entered now seemed diminished, consumed by something none of them could see. One sleepless night, Sarah found herself Googling dog grief behavior and dog sensing spirits. The search results ranged from scientific to supernatural, from behavioral psychology to ghost stories. Most of it seemed like nonsense, but one article caught her attention. It discussed how dogs process loss differently than humans. Where people use language and ritual to understand death, dogs rely on scent and routine. When a companion disappears without the dog being able to process the death, to smell it, to witness it, to understand its finality, they can develop what veterinary behaviorists call unresolved separation anxiety. The dog's brain keeps searching for the missing scent pattern, the article explained. They know their companion existed. They remember, but without closure, they can't accept the absence. Sarah's heart began to race as she read further. The article mentioned that scents can linger in spaces for months, even years, especially in areas with poor ventilation or porous materials. And certain emotions, fear, illness, distress, produce pheromones that embed more deeply than normal scents. She thought about Apollo's final days. The puppy had been so sick, lying in that corner of the guest room while they tried desperately to make him comfortable. He had been there for almost 48 hours before they took him to the clinic for the last time. And then Sarah remembered something that made her stomach drop. When they repainted the room, rushing through the process in their eagerness to move forward, they hadn't just covered the walls. There had been a small area of drywall damage where they temporarily installed a baby gate to keep Apollo contained. Liam had patched it quickly with joint compound, sanded it smooth, and painted over it. The corner where Apollo had spent his last comfortable moments had been sealed behind a layer of drywall, compound, and paint, but scent molecules can permeate deep into porous materials. And if Apollo's scent, his illness, his fear, his presence, was trapped behind that thin layer of repair work, Thor would be able to smell it. Faintly perhaps, but enough to know his son was there, or had been there. Or was somehow still there in a way Thor's powerful nose could detect, but his heartbroken mind couldn't reconcile with his son's permanent absence. Thor wasn't guarding an empty room. He was standing vigil over a tomb that only he could perceive. The next morning, Sarah shared her theory with Liam over coffee, while Thor maintained his post in the hallway. Liam was skeptical at first, but as Sarah explained the science behind scent retention and canine grieving processes, he began to understand. So you're saying we accidentally sealed Apollo's scent into the wall, and Thor has been able to smell it this whole time, but can't process why he can smell his son, but can't find him. Exactly, Sarah said quietly. We thought we were helping him heal by erasing every trace of Apollo, but we trapped the one thing Thor needed to let go. The proof that Apollo is really gone. They decided on a careful approach. That evening, after Mia was in bed, they brought Thor into the room and sat with him in the corner he'd been obsessing over. Sarah had gathered every item they still had that belonged to Apollo: his collar, his favorite toy, a blanket that still carried traces of his puppy scent. She placed them on the floor in the corner and encouraged Thor to investigate them. The change in Thor was immediate and profound. He approached the items slowly, his entire body tense with anticipation. He sniffed the collar first, and a sound emerged from his chest that Sarah had never heard before, a keening wail of recognition and loss. He picked up the toy gently in his mouth, carried it to the center of the room, and lay down with it between his paws. For the first time in months, Thor wasn't fixated on the wall. He was processing, remembering, allowing himself to grieve openly, but it wasn't enough. After an hour, Thor returned to the corner, sniffing at the wall where the repair work had been done. He scratched at it gently, then looked at Sarah and Liam with eyes that seemed to beg for understanding. We need to open it, Sarah said. We need to let him smell what's behind there. Liam hesitated. You want to tear out the wall? I want to give him closure. The next morning, they brought in a contractor friend who owed them a favor. Sarah explained what she needed, and though he looked at her like she was crazy, he agreed to carefully remove a small section of the repaired drywall in the corner, just enough to expose the original wall beneath. The contractor's utility knife scored through the fresh paint, revealing the joint compound beneath. As he carefully cut out a 12-inch square section of drywall, the family held their breath. Thor sat perfectly still, watching every movement with an intensity that was almost frightening. When the section of drywall came free, revealing the original wall surface behind it, the change in the room was subtle but unmistakable. There was a smell, faint, almost imperceptible to human noses, but definitely present. It was the musty odor of illness, mixed with something else, something organic and sad. Thor's reaction was instantaneous and overwhelming. He lunged forward, pressing his entire face into the opening. His body began to shake violently as he inhaled deeply, over and over, his nose working frantically to absorb every molecule of scent that had been trapped behind that barrier for months. The sounds he made were primal. Whimpers and cries that spoke of recognition, loss, and finally understanding. Sarah dropped to her knees beside him, wrapping her arms around his trembling body. "It's okay, buddy. It's okay. He was here. Apollo was here." Liam stood frozen, watching this powerful dog, an animal bred for strength and courage, completely undone by the ghost of a scent, by the olfactory memory of a son he'd lost, but never stopped searching for. For 20 minutes, Thor didn't move from that spot. He alternated between sniffing the opening and pulling back to look at it, as if trying to reconcile what his nose told him with what his eyes could see. Sarah stayed with him through every moment, stroking his head, speaking softly, acknowledging his grief in a way they should have done months ago. Finally, Thor stepped back from the wall. He turned in a slow circle, taking in the entire room with new eyes. Then he walked to where Sarah had left Apollo's collar and toy. He picked up the collar carefully in his mouth and returned to the corner. He lay down, the collar between his paws, his nose inches from the opening in the wall, and released a sigh so deep it seemed to empty his entire body. The crying stopped. The scratching stopped. Thor had found what he'd been searching for. Not Apollo himself, but proof that Apollo had existed, had been real, had left a mark on this world that Thor's powerful senses could still detect. The scent was evidence. The memory was validated. The loss was finally, heartbreakingly real. Sarah and Liam sat with Thor for the rest of the afternoon. They told him stories about Apollo, showing him photos on their phones, speaking the puppy's name aloud for the first time since his death. They had been so careful to avoid mentioning Apollo, thinking it would help everyone move on faster. But Thor needed to hear the name. He needed to know they remembered too. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the room, Thor stood up. He picked up Apollo's toy, a worn rope that had once been the puppy's favorite, and carried it out of the room. But instead of returning to his vigil at the door, he walked down the hallway to the living room where Mia was playing. He dropped the toy at her feet and, for the first time in months, pressed his head against her small shoulder in the gesture of affection that had been his trademark before grief consumed him. Mia's face lit up. "Thor's back!" she cried, throwing her arms around his neck, and he was. Not completely, not yet. But he was beginning to return from wherever his grief had taken him. The days following the revelation brought gradual but significant changes to Thor's behavior. Sarah and Liam made the conscious decision to leave the room as it was, the opening in the wall exposed, Apollo's belongings arranged in the corner like a small memorial. They weren't hiding from the loss anymore. They were acknowledging it. Thor's relationship with the room transformed. Instead of standing guard with desperate obsession, he would visit periodically throughout the day, the way someone might visit a gravestone. He would enter calmly, spend a few moments in the corner, sometimes sniffing the opening, sometimes just lying quietly with Apollo's toy, and then leave to rejoin the family. His appetite returned. Within a week, he had eaten his first full meal without coercion, and within 2 weeks, his weight began to normalize. The ribs that had started to show beneath his white coat gradually disappeared behind restored muscle. His eyes, which had been dull and distant, regained their alert sharpness. Most importantly, his bond with Mia rekindled. The little girl had her guardian back. Thor resumed his position as her shadow, following her from room to room, lying beside her during cartoon time, accepting her clumsy attempts at grooming with patient dignity. The household's rhythm, which had been disrupted by months of anxiety and confusion, began to find its natural flow again. But the most remarkable change came 3 weeks after they opened the wall. Sarah was making dinner when she heard Mia giggling in the living room. She walked in to find Thor playing for the first time since Apollo's death. He had found an old tennis ball and was tossing it in the air, catching it, and presenting it to Mia for throws. His tail was wagging. His mouth was open in what could only be described as a dog's smile. "Look, Mommy," Mia called out. "Thor's happy again." Sarah felt tears stream down her face. She hadn't realized how much she'd missed seeing her dog experience joy. That night, as the family prepared for bed, Thor made a choice that signaled his true healing. Instead of heading to the guest room, he followed Mia to her bedroom, circled 3 times in his old spot beside her bed, and lay down with a contented sigh. When Sarah came in to kiss Mia goodnight, she found the little girl already asleep, one hand resting on Thor's broad head, both of them breathing in peaceful synchronization. Thor looked up at Sarah with eyes that seemed clearer than they had been in months. There was still sadness there. There would always be sadness, but there was also peace. He had found his way back from grief's darkest corner. The guest room remained as they had left it, the small opening in the wall like a window into the past. Sarah and Liam discussed repairing it, but something always stopped them. Thor needed that connection, that tangible link to Apollo's memory. And maybe they needed it too. Occasionally they would find Thor in the room, lying quietly in the corner, with his chin resting near the opening. But these visits were different now. They weren't desperate searches or tormented vigils. They were moments of remembrance, of a father connecting with the memory of his son, of a loyal heart honoring a bond that death could diminish, but never destroy. Dr. Morrison, when he came for a follow-up house call, was amazed by Thor's recovery. "I've never seen anything like this," he admitted, examining the now healthy dog. "But it makes sense. Dogs are scent-driven creatures. Their noses tell them truths their eyes can't see. You gave him what he needed most, validation that his grief was real, that his loss mattered." The veterinarian looked at the opening in the wall, then back at Thor. "You know what this dog taught you? That healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means integrating loss into life in a way that lets you move forward, while still honoring what was lost." Sarah nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. 3 months later, the family held a small ceremony in the backyard. They planted a white rose bush in memory of Apollo, placing his collar at the base of the plant. Thor sat beside them throughout the ceremony, calm and dignified, his presence a reminder that love transcends loss. When they filled in the hole around the rosebush, Liam carefully placed the section of drywall they'd removed from the guest room into the ground beneath the plant's roots. It seemed fitting, transforming that barrier that had caused so much pain into foundation for something beautiful and alive. Thor approached the newly planted bush and sniffed it carefully. Then he sat back, looked up at Sarah and Liam, and let out a single soft bark. It was the first sound he'd made in the presence of anything related to Apollo that wasn't a cry of pain. It sounded like goodbye. It sounded like peace. Thor's story teaches us something profound about the nature of grief and the depth of love that animals are capable of experiencing. We often underestimate the emotional lives of our pets, dismissing their behaviors as simple or instinctive. But Thor proved that dogs can suffer from complicated grief, from unresolved loss, from the torment of searching for answers that their minds can't fully process. His loyalty was so fierce that he couldn't let go without proof. His love was so deep that he could smell his son's ghost in the molecules of a room that appeared empty. His heart was so broken that he wasted away in front of that door, unable to move forward because no one had helped him understand that moving backward was impossible. But this story also teaches us about resilience, about the healing power of acknowledgement and understanding. When Sarah and Liam finally listened, truly listened to what Thor was trying to tell them, when they gave him permission to grieve openly, rather than expecting him to simply forget, he found his way back to life. The empty room was never really empty. It held memories, molecules, and a father's desperate love for his lost son. And when that love was finally validated, when Thor's grief was honored rather than dismissed, he could begin to heal. Today, Thor is thriving. He still visits the guest room occasionally, spending quiet moments in the corner that once held his vigil. The opening in the wall remains, a small portal into the past that Sarah and Liam have no plans to repair. It's become a reminder for the whole family that healing doesn't require erasure. Sometimes it requires a window into what we've lost, a connection to what we've loved, and permission to remember without being consumed by the remembering. Mia, now 6 years old, understands better than many adults that Thor had a son, that he lost him, and that he needed time to be sad. She's learned that grief is not something to fix or rush past, but something to sit with, to honor, and eventually to integrate into the ongoing story of life. The legacy Thor and Apollo left behind is this: love doesn't end when life does. The bonds we form imprint on our souls, or in Thor's case, in the incredible sensory library of his nose and the unshakable loyalty of his heart. And sometimes healing requires us to acknowledge those bonds, to make space for them, to let them exist alongside our forward motion rather than demanding they disappear so we can move on faster. Thor taught his family that grief deserves recognition, that loss requires processing, and that the strongest among us are often the ones whose hearts break most completely when someone they love disappears from their world. If Thor's story moved you, if it taught you something about the depth of animal emotion and the power of patient understanding, I need you to do something. Subscribe to Windeco Untold right now. We don't just tell stories. We reveal the truth about bonds that break us and rebuild us, about loyalty that transcends words, and about the lessons our animal companions teach us if we're willing to listen. Drop a comment telling us what you learned from Thor's journey. Have you ever witnessed grief in an animal? How did you help them through it? Your stories matter, and this community needs to hear them. Share this video with anyone who's ever loved and lost, with anyone who lives with animals and wants to understand them better, with anyone who needs to be reminded that healing isn't linear and love doesn't end. Thor is thriving now, playing with Mia, protecting his family, and occasionally visiting the corner of a room that holds a ghost only he can perceive. He's living proof that even in our darkest moments, when we're broken and lost and crying at doors no one else understands, there is a way back to the light. We just need someone to listen, to understand, and to help us find closure in whatever form our hearts require. Thank you for being part of Thor's journey. Until the next untold story, remember, the ones who love us most fiercely are often the ones whose grief runs deepest. Honor it, acknowledge it, and help them find their way back home.